although I know many of you came in just for Chad, I'll try to sort of work our way through this.
How do you follow Buckle Buckle?
No, you cannot. You cannot. That's the, we need to set our expectations much lower.
Things get slow, just say that.
So you've guessed this is the Frickin' Frack Show. We're going to talk to you about a project that location is right out over here, right next to a whole bunch of stuff that goes on. We got obviously Kyle Field, but also Reed Arena and Bluebell Park, where many of the Aggie sporting events are. We've got a couple dozen trains that go through the intersection. We've got a whole bunch of traffic congestion. And we also have something like 200 special events on an annual basis. In addition to that, we've got new student conferences that bring lots of unfamiliar visitors here, and then we turn over the student body about 20 or 25% every year. It's also the southwestern gateway to the A&M and Bryan College Station area. We think that the area is going to about double in population over the next 30 years or so. So we've got this continual growth from the community, but also from A&M. We're at 63,000 students right now. We're also the fourth largest downtown in the state. If you look at faculty, staff, students, we got about 75,000 of that combined. Dallas and Houston are about 150, Austin's about 125,000, downtown Fort Worth and downtown San Antonio are about 50,000. So if you think about a community of 250,000 with the fourth largest downtown, that starts to suggest some of the challenges we have. So the project that we're talking about today began as sort of a traditional, I would say a traditional grade separation project. Wanted to improve safety, wanted to reduce congestion, and then growth started happening, and that's really what sort of changed this, not only with the student body, but also traffic congestion. This is a picture of what happened in 2013. We had Alabama come to town. We had traffic congestion for something like 4 hours after the football game. It was also the time when A&M enrollment began to really take off. A combination of factors, but basically, if you think about all the challenges that you have for a game day, you've also got those challenges Monday through Friday. Again, fourth largest downtown in the state. So we've got a ton of traffic congestion as well in this area. You can sort of see some of the cause of that looking at our good friend Google Earth. The area up in the upper right corner, left, right, is the intersection. You can see Reed Arena as the brownish area up there. 1995, when the project was beginning to get going, right? About 42,000 students, 140,000 in Brazos County. Look at the area south of George Bush, the horizontal line. A lot of development on the east side of Wellborn Road, not very much on the west side, and not very much going on up in campus. You can see by 2003, we've got more development down here in this area south of Wellborn Road, south of Bush. And then by now, this area is pretty well filled in, and there's a lot of development down on the south side. Got a new development of 3,400 students just rolled in up here. Population of the county is over 200,000 and 63,000 students. So that's kind of some of the basis for the project. Chad, you want to tell them a little bit about kind of how we got to the point where we are?
Sure. Well, really, originally this was thought of as a railroad grade separation project. That term might stick. I see a couple of folks nodding, but back in the day, we had funds statewide to separate railroads from our intersections. But even before that, the discussion had already gone on in the 90s with our local MPO on whether or not our railroad would stay in town or be relocated out of town. Not to anyone's surprise, there really wasn't anybody that wanted a railroad in their backyard anywhere else than where it already sat. So the thing was decided to stay where it is, that railroad line. So if you're familiar with our community, we already have multiple grade separations in town. There's one down at Wellborn Road to the south. You've got the recent one that was constructed on campus here at the Bell Tower, And we have one to the north in the south end of Bryan there at Finn Feather and Villa Maria Road that already are grade separating out the railroad from our system. But then as we looked into it, we really started to see the components of the multi-modes that go through this intersection. It was not just a railroad grade separation project. This is our highest bike ped used intersection in town. And if you're there looking at class changes and during the semester, it's pretty amazing how many folks are going through that intersection, and right now there just really aren't the facilities to handle them. You throw in the train component to that, which was the original thought, you're getting about 24 trains a day. If you go to an Aggie baseball game, lasts about 3 hours, you're probably going to see 3 or 4 trains that are going to go by, and it is pretty routine, pretty continuous. That is a steady movement through that intersection. And we had issues in the past with the safety side of trains mixing with a university campus. So we took all those things into consideration as we started to come up with what our plans would be. Originally, to be honest, on the operational side of things for during construction and what type of impacts this would be, which Tim's going to get into a little bit in a minute on how we're going about trying to fold that into the everyday operations of this transportation area. We didn't give a lot of thought at the time. We were, as Tim's title on the project so noted, we still were somewhat small town approach to our projects. We came up with solutions. We came up with what we wanted to do. We didn't necessarily think about all the overreaching impacts on all the other systems that were going on around this area, be it the bicycle component, the pedestrian component, the vehicles, the trains, the buses, the school schedules, all those things that are using this interchange. So it started to evolve that our solution needed to take all these things into account. So you'll see in the, well, I guess that's the next slide showing up here. Yeah. So this was the layout in very simple means that we came up with. There's other views here shortly that will show you a little bit more what's going on, but we decided that a very important component of this would be, it's not,
whoa, dude.
You have to do this again now.
I cover.
I'm gonna hit the red button again. Okay, there we go.
Only the
So a very important component is you can see these this color path that is moving all through the system. Those are the bicycle pedestrian paths. So one interesting thing about this layout that we came up with was that you would need to separate those out completely from the intersection. So anyone in a bicycle pedestrian mode who is trying to get from one quadrant to the other through this interchange is totally removed from the vehicular traffic. That's even more important when you consider the clientele that is going through this intersection day and night, maybe not always using the perfect judgment in reference to the vehicles and the trains. And so the other component here, of course, is the railroad. As you see here, there's shown 2 lines through here. As we got into the process, one of the things that came about was if you're not going to relocate the railroad, that you would need the opportunity for double tracking. Double tracking would then, of course, have the potential to increase then our train component through this intersection. We could have easily 40, 50 trains a day that would then further compound our issues. Then on the vehicular side, we were able to include in north-south continuous movement on connectors, if you want to call it that, within a depressed section in this alternative of all of the turning movements going down at a lowered level. Now, all of these things then worked out well to handle all those different modes, and so from an operational standpoint, this is a very good solution. But building this and going through the pains of such is going to be a challenge. So we're very much concerned with this evolution that has occurred in the growth of our campus, of our community, the traffic, all modes of traffic. And so that is very much on our minds now as to it is not as simple of a construction project as we might have once hoped.
Because originally, the design concept was to close the intersection for some period of time, rather than try to live with a relatively narrow cross-section that would go through the intersection during the construction zone. Chad and his folks met with the City College Station and A&M, and those groups all said, yeah, let's do some version of rip the Band-Aid off. Let's close the whole thing, try to get it done. But again, that was back before we had a $485 million rebuild of the football stadium. And so now we're at the point where the football stadium and all the growth had kind of changed some of the expectations. So they're out there buying right away. We've got a set of construction plans, but as Chad indicated, we're not necessarily sure how to get from what we have to what we want, and we don't necessarily have the funding either. But Chad and Lance and others feel like if we can get a project consensus, then we can go get some money, some combination of university money and state money. Yes, no?
I think that's fair.
Okay, awesome. I was hoping he'd say that.
Buckle.
So my colleague Madison Metzger-Galarza, who's somewhere around here, and I have been going out trying to find out from people what they're thinking. One of the ideas that we're bringing to them is there's an awful lot of other activity going on. So one of the projects that's going on between TxDOT and City of College Station is widening FM 2818 around the west side of campus. That's very congested. Technically, it reaches a level of jacked up. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the highway capacity manual, but they're going to widen that to 6 lanes. It's going to provide a good reliever route for the Bush-Wellborn project, but that then gives you a sense of, well, we got to get that project done before the Bush-Wellborn project can get done. We're already doing a whole lot of aggressive traffic operations, and so that's going to fold into what we're trying to do with the project. We're also all about trying to minimize the construction disruption, but really what we need is kind of a public consensus. We need the public, number one, to get involved, to help us understand what their needs, wants, desires are. We may not be able to figure out how to address all of them, but if we don't know, then it's going to be difficult for us to really plan the best project and construction project. So Madison and I have been going around trying to get people to fill out this questionnaire. We were pretty dang successful at raising awareness, but we had to do this in a number of different ways. We were down here in the Memorial Student Center hallways accosting students. The best question seemed to be, hey, what's the thing you love about the Bush-Wellborn intersection? People look at you like, huh? But it was pretty effective at getting them engaged and getting them to understand what the project was about. We've also been to a whole bunch of meetings, both on campus and off, something like 1,100 attendees. We asked for time on other people's agendas. We had a lot of these that were relatively small, as you can see, close to 30 meetings of 24 attendees or less. So we were looking for input. The only way you really get that is in these smaller meetings. So as I said, we think we did a pretty good job. We got 4,100 completed surveys, and then in addition to that, we got over 4,000 comments to 3 open-ended questions that were along the lines of, what should we be doing? What are your biggest concerns? What are your suggestions? I think all the comments we got back seemed to indicate that, number one, they appreciated TxDOT coming to them with, hey, we want you to help us plan this project. It was also overwhelmingly the case that people wanted us to do something. There's a very, 4% said, nah, we like it the way it is, it's fine. So we think we've got consensus on doing something already. There's also consensus that we've got too much traffic. We need the separation of the modes that Chad talked about. So really the notion was the project ideas you came up with 20 years ago all seem relevant. There is some discussion about how do we get there, and so that we engage them on that. What do you want to do? How do you want to start this project? How do you want to continue this project? And so, you're faced with a very complicated intersection. It's going to be closed down for a while. What are you going to do? Well, the traffic engineers in the audience are probably thinking, well, okay, well, you got to do everything. So we listed everything. We got very good support on changing routes. We got basically no support for anything else. And what do you think? My supposition is when somebody says, I want to change routes, they know their way through the intersection to get around the Bush-Wellborn intersection, and nobody else knows it. The other 69,999 cars that go through there, they don't know my route, and I'm going to be able to sneak through there. I'm guessing that's not the case. And so it also, the survey and the questionnaire and the conversations really brought out the importance of educating our customers to make sure that they get the sense of what this project is going to be about. So where we are in the project, we've got a bunch of ideas. What we've taken away from the conversations and the surveys is there's a lot of support for the depressed version of the intersection, the lower version, but there's also a number of people who think, well, I want to see an elevated. You know, we've had hurricanes that have flooded out intersections. We've had issues of lack of reliability of pumps here on campus. The pumps in the existing underpasses don't work. So people are familiar with the aspects of weather. They're concerned about that. They also like the ideas that Chad and their group came up with in terms of the pedestrian box, but if you notice, that wasn't a full box. It sort of went around three sides. Well, the way our campus and our area are redeveloping, we think there's a lot of support for making that a full box and having crossings in all four directions because the land use is going to change. I think that's one of the things that we're trying to anticipate. If you look over on the other side of campus, over on University Drive, if you've been here over the last 10 years, you've seen that area change dramatically. It's going to continue to do that. It's hard to think that same sort of challenge isn't going to happen on the south side. So we're really trying to develop two schedules, one that react to this notion of rapid. What does rapid mean? What rapid means to Chad and I may be different than what it means to the community. One version is have the closure be as short as possible. Another one is to have the construction time be as short as possible. So we're coming up with concepts and pictures and timelines that'll help people understand all of that. We've got some SketchUp drawings. I'll show you a couple here in a second, but I think really it's a combination of design and traffic maintenance and communication that's really going to be the end result of this project. Do you want to chat a little bit about this?
Well, the analysis we did looking at different ways to construct this thing were quite interesting, and there was different interest in whether or not you would close the entire intersection for a period of time. Would that be acceptable, and what length of time would be acceptable? Or would you painstakingly control traffic in phases where you would pass travelers through the construction zone? And we actually hired a research firm to do an analysis and model that, and it was very interesting that you could close this intersection completely and potentially build this project in as little as less than a year. I keep that in broad terms, although we had it calculated to greater than that, but you know, that was just a model. But we do have a good system with 2818, FM 60, 2347, 6, all those lovely TxDOT terms, numbers for these roads that those of you who know them as University and George Bush and Harvey Mitchell and all those. But we do have a good system that could move you through this area. But as Tim was saying, perception of what is least pain, least impactful is different. And so if we were to go through a normal traffic control phase on the project, it could easily be 4 to 5 years of pain. And around here, that somewhat is translated into football seasons. We always get asked, well, how many football seasons are you going to impact? And so, you know, in one sense, you could potentially get that down to 1 or 0. In the other, you could go through that for many years. And there's lots of vantage points from Kyle Field to pan the camera over and look in that general direction and see construction, which isn't necessarily desired for the next 4 or 5 years. But
Got a football stadium to pay off.
That's
Yeah.
right. And so perception and expectations were ramped up. That's what happens when you start a project and don't necessarily get the ability to finish it in a short amount of time. But when you then have things like the Kyle Field expansion that took place in a matter of 2 off seasons, when you have things like Reed Arena that just pops up on the horizon, there's now a dormitory out there that it seems like 6 months ago we were working on them with a driveway request on George Bush, and now it's the size of Jerry World in Dallas is out there on the horizon with I don't know how many thousand students are located
3,400
there.
beds.
And so if that can be done in that sort of a timeline, then we need to, as TxDOT, be as sensitive as we can to try and accomplish the same thing. So, back to
Yeah,
you.
so I think when we think about this, we've got this whole toolbox of things. I think some of the good conversations we've had on campus indicate there's a willingness to accept some of the problems. So we're talking to people about maybe changing the class schedules around, changing class locations, changing parking locations. You know, if you think about our Board of Regents, you know, the number of things they care about football. This isn't being taped, is it? Care about football. The next thing they care about is parking for football, and then everything else. So, you know, you start messing with parking, and people start being really interested. The notion of all of these solutions being a part of the package, I think, is going to be a community and a campus community kind of effort. But it's also on kind of what we're doing in terms of providing people with the information, but also making sure that the construction phasing does as good a job as possible of getting to the end relatively quickly. As I said, we've got some SketchUp versions of what this might look like. This first one is sort of a broad overview of an elevated concept. Again, I don't think there's if you look at the surveys, there's about a 10 or 15% level of interest in having something elevated. You can see this would be, you know, you got to get your clearance over the railroad, so this winds up being relatively high in the air. That's going to block out some of the views of the $485 million stadium. It's also going to block out some of the views of Coach Childress's new baseball field. McDonald's is going to be a little bit less visible for those of you on a state per diem. But if you think about it, you know, you could do this project relatively quickly if it was all elevated. You do a bunch of precast stuff, you do some night work, you can move things in and out much more rapidly than if you're trying to dig a hole. I haven't heard from the athletic department, but I also assume that we'd have to have some sort of black tarp fencing around this corner so that Alabama doesn't come in and steal our plays at the practice facility that's located right adjacent to that. This is more of what the elevated, the depressed concept that we started with pulled into this world of we need more pedestrian treatments, we need some wider bike ped treatments. So we've got a full box of the bicycle pedestrian layer here. We are over into we're using the same right of way, so the same area that was initially conceptualized is what we're using here. But again, rearranging some of the elements, moving things a little bit closer, a little bit more compact, using some different construction techniques. So I think the general thought here is that we've addressed most of the challenges in the original project and in the project that we've got. I think that we're at that next step where we're taking some of these ideas, some of them in the doable, some of them in the kind of crazy talk. You start talking to professors about changing their class schedules around, that starts to sound like crazy talk to them. But I think given the notion of relatively rapid construction, we're not talking about 4 or 5 years worth of disruption, we're talking about a year or something less. So we think that we've got a good set of project ideas that'll address the challenges in a way that will recognize the limitations that we have. So questions, comments?
This is perfect.
Well, there's one there.
The question was, have you thought about rerouting the railroad?
We did think about that many a times years ago. The whole community actually did, and that was the thing I mentioned early on that was about the MPO study of moving the railroad. And unfortunately, there weren't any takers on wanting the railroad, and so that's where we then embarked on this effort of grade separating our other systems here in town from the railroad. So I don't think that the railroad potentially is going anywhere anytime soon.
Question over here? Is there a question?
I guess just one of the key takeaways, just kind of to wrap this up, would just be we at TxDOT we've had to open our eyes to the fact that our same old response a lot of times of if you're going to then impose these inconveniences on the traveling public, that your same old answer of we'll leave earlier or go a different way is not necessarily going to be a well-received answer. And so we also know that there's others who can and do a better job than even we can to reach out and have conversations to make our projects the best that they can. And we have to humbly accept that. And we're doing so in this case, and it's working out really well that the partnership to gain insight through other avenues, not just our normal, unfortunately, typically dry meetings that we call public meetings about our projects, aren't always the way to get the best input. So it's worked really well, and we've actually learned a lot of things, I think, hopefully from each other, not just from our side.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great partnership. Questions other than where's lunch? Okay.
Thank you,
much.
guys.